So the big problem with this budget is that it takes the country in the wrong direction. Well, of course, we've had the long-expected Rachel Reeves budget. Today has not been amazingly surprising. Everything has been trailed. Of course, a lot of the detail was actually leaked just before it. And it's what we expected, a high tax, high spend, high regulation budget takes the country in quite the wrong direction. But that's what we expected, and that's what we've got. So what this budget has done has brought in the highest tax burden in British history. Even in World War II, we weren't taxing people as highly as this, 38.2 at the end of this parliament. And it's been achieved, I think, principally by freezing the income tax thresholds, which makes a lot of money because inflation isn't properly under control, for one thing, but also through what she laughingly called a smorgasbord of lots and lots of little taxes. The government feels like they've kind of looked at the economy and tried to find areas of activity that somehow had escaped HMRC's attention and decided to tax them. And they don't raise much money individually, but together they raise quite a lot. And that's how they've done it. So more government control, more regulation in each case for small bits of money, unfortunately. But the total is very high. So what we're seeing is that the income tax thresholds are being frozen, so the level at which you pay more tax. And obviously, as inflation grows and wages go, those bite at lower and lower levels. So more and more people are being dragged into high levels of tax. I'm old enough to remember a time when high levels of tax here were genuinely for highly paid people. But now that isn't going to be the case. Working people are increasingly dragged in to these limits, and it's an income tax rise by any other name. So as usual, another big source of the money has been sin taxes, so tobacco, alcohol, and in this case gambling. There's been a big increase in at least some gambling taxes. But the problem with these is that they're already at very high levels. The country's very largely taxed out on this sort of thing. And what we're finding, and it's very obvious in the figures, what we're finding is that people are simply finding ways round them. They are evading the duty one way or another, and actually the tax take is falling. And if you look at, for example, at tobacco taxes, where it's clearest, the total take for tobacco tax has fallen by 40%, just over the period between 22 and 24. So these effects are really big. There's a limit to which you can keep piling spending on taxation on these things before it becomes completely counterproductive, and we are well past that point, it seems now. So there's lots of other areas too, and just to pick on a couple, we've got the milkshake shakedown, if you like, the extension of the sugar tax to milkshakes and lattes. Whether that's going to have any real effect on obesity, I have my doubts, but it's certainly going to raise some money. The first time we've had this in this country at a national level is the hotels tax, a couple of pounds every night, every time you book a hotel in Britain, as if British hotels and British tourism was not already expensive enough. It's going to get a bit more expensive. Local councils get a bit more money to do who knows what with. So wherever you look, the tax net is coming for you. Regulation is going up, tax is going up, and growth is going to go down. Okay, so on the spending side, the centrepiece, or at least what Rachel Reeves wanted to be the centrepiece of this budget, is the end of the two-child cap for benefits. And this has been a long-standing demand of the Labour Party. They finally got it today. It's the kind of thing they care about. The problem is that we spend a huge amount already through the government. We really can't afford to spend any more. If the government insists on spending more, you've really got to be sure it's going to actually make some difference. And in this case, it's not clear at all. The IFS, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, has just brought out reports suggesting it won't actually have much behavioural effect on children going to school and so on. So this appears to be a political demand. The real world effect may not be so great, but it's certainly going to cost several £billion money that we can ill afford at the moment in this country. So another big announcement today has been the increase in minimum wage. And it's been particularly marked for people aged 16 to 20, where it's gone up by 9% or so. And of course, chancellors love increasing the minimum wage because it doesn't cost them anything. It's paid by employers instead. And of course, what you see is that young people who are employed get a bit more money. What you don't see is all the people who might have got a job but no longer have one because it's too expensive to employ one. We now have a minimum wage that's amongst the highest, if not the absolute highest, in the OECD, and it is certainly having deterrent effects on employment. We could see unemployment beginning to tick up in this country. One of our strengths has been the good labour market that's now being weakened, and the increase in the minimum wage is unfortunately a big part of that problem. Of course, employers don't magically get more money when the minimum wage goes up. They have to find that money from somewhere. And when growth is as slow as it is at the moment in this country, there are only so many ways they can do it. Either they hold down wages generally for everyone, they pass it on in prices, or they employ fewer people than they would ideally want to. And you can see all of those effects being very clear, and they're going to get more marked into the future. The government has given a few other giveaways, even though it can't really afford them. It's frozen prescription charges again, and it's made a big thing about freezing a large chunk of rail costs for commuters. Of course, it hasn't really changed the price of those things. It's simply chosen to subsidise them more out of general taxation to hold the price down. And this is what you get when governments run industries. They're prone to political pressure. They won't let the price mechanism work. And it's much easier for them to subsidise and keep the cost down than allow real market forces to work. And that's what we're going to see in this case. Commuters will be very happy, but the 90% of people who don't go to work on a commuter train have to pay for it. One piece of good news is that fuel duty continues to be frozen, which is very good news. Most people in this country do still get around by car. Petrol prices, diesel prices really matter to people, and people are very aware of those prices. They're very price sensitive about them. The government doesn't seem to believe that they are price sensitive, though, because it can't stop tinkering, and it seems it's going to impose on petrol retailers the requirement to use a particular app so that consumers can compare prices of fuel, as if they couldn't do that already and don't do it all the time. So the government doesn't trust competitive forces to work. It thinks it can only work when the government is making them happen. Really isn't the case. In this case, as in many others, they ought to be trusting the market, trusting consumers to find the right outcomes, and then we'll get the best outcome for society. So the big problem with this budget is that it takes the country, or rather it continues to take the country, more accurately, in the wrong direction. For a decade or so now, we've seen tax and spend go up. We've been running consistent deficits. We've seen continued increases in regulation, and this budget just continues on that track to push us up to the highest levels of tax and spend ever in some cases. Now, the problem is we're not going to get prosperity that way. We visibly aren't. Growth is slowing, income per head is slowing. We need to reverse it all out. We need to start cutting spending. We need to start getting the tax burden down. We need to start deregulating. We need to start getting the government out of people's hair so they can get on with their lives and spend their own money. And it seems that that is not a very widespread opinion in our political classes, not only in the government, I'm afraid, at the moment. And that's the direction that we need to go in. So, really what the country needed was the state to get its boot off the neck of the country. And in fact, it's given it a kick in the teeth.